On today's show, the San Antonio Spurs reportedly tried to trade for Cavs guard Darius Garland. What that says about his future in Cleveland on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show, of course, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. If you're listening, make sure you are subscribed to the pod. Leave us a 5-star review. That is how you can help us to grow the show. Also, drop a nice comment in that review as well. Be sure to check the show out on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On Cavs on YouTube. If you're not watching this, go watch this. If you are watching this, click that thumbs up button. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Cavs channel. Also, click that notification bell so you don't miss a thing when it comes to the Cleveland Cavaliers, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Sports are still going on this summer, and FanDuel has something for everybody every day. They're hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hi again, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers at places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. On today's show, I want to talk about Darius Garland. So it was reported by Yahoo Sports' Jake Fisher. I believe this came out on late Wednesday, early Thursday, that the San Antonio Spurs reportedly, this is according to Jake Fisher, the Spurs had interest in Darius Garland and they made an offer to the Cavaliers to trade for the All-Star guard. So I do think that this says a couple of things about how this offseason has gone. And the first thing that I do want to talk about here is a couple of weeks ago, Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com, he caught up with Darius Garland right at the start of Summer League. And Garland told Fedor that he wants to be in Cleveland, that the trade rumors surrounding him are just noise, and he's in a place where he wants to be, that he's happy with the Cavaliers, he's happy to be on this basketball team. I thought at the time all of that made sense. Guys don't often want to leave a place just to leave a place, and I think that Darius probably has a bit of a bad taste in his mouth, no pun intended, but with that jaw injury last year, there probably is a bit of a bad taste coming back, because he had what I have referred to many, many times on this show as a nightmare of a season. His 2023-2024 season was one to forget. He had that jaw injury. I believe he had a wrist or a thumb injury along the way too. There was some off-the-court stuff he was dealing with in terms of some family things that he needed to attend to. All of those things, when put together, created what was, I believe, the worst season of Darius Garland's career. Now, you could go back and say, oh, well, he was worse his rookie year, and yeah, sure, from a basketball standpoint he was, but when you consider the expectations and everything else that goes along with it, I thought that this year was the most disappointing, I guess is probably a more fair way to say, the most disappointing season of Darius Garland's career. So I think that wanting to right that wrong in Cleveland probably was true with Garland. But the fact that the Spurs reportedly made an offer to the Cavs tells me a couple things. It tells me Garland does want to be here. Because if there's a team out there that makes an offer for a guy, and Garland is a former All-Star, but he's also not at a superstar level to where the Cavs need to get the absolute most out of them, and he has, massive control over where he could go. But I do think if he were disgruntled and did want out and the Spurs made a legitimate offer, there probably would have been more dialogue between the two teams, and we would have found out about it before right now. But it does sound like, according to this report, that was immediately rebuffed, that the Cavs didn't have really much interest in negotiating with San Antonio because they don't have much interest in sending Garland out. So hearing this now does make me feel as if both Garland wants to be in Cleveland, that what we heard from The Athletic very, very soon after the season ended against the Boston Celtics, I'm not going to say it wasn't true because these things change, but I think that Garland wanting out, if and when, obviously now it's in the past, Donovan Mitchell signed a contract extension, was a little bit overblown. I think it's fair to say that at this point, because if Garland really truly wanted out, I think he could have made things messy. Obviously, he's done the opposite of that by speaking publicly for the first time, saying he wants to be in Cleveland. I think behind the scenes, things could have been made messy too, because you have to remember here, who represents Darius Garland? Who is his agent? He's with Clutch Sports. Rich Paul is one of the most powerful people in the NBA. If he wanted to get Darius Garland elsewhere, because Darius Garland wanted to be somewhere, and I do want to explain something about Rich in the way how most agents in the NBA work. These agents don't try and get their players somewhere because the agent wants to do that. It's their job is to try and accomplish the player's goal. And I think it's clear here, Darius Garland's goal is to be in Cleveland because things could have been made messy. Obviously, they've been cleaned up, I think it's fair to say. And then the other side of this is when Kobe Altman spoke after the season, immediately or a week or so ago, or a week or so after the loss of the Celtics, I believe it was a day or two after they relieved JB Bickerstaff of head coaching duties. And he was asked about the core four. Obviously, that's Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen. And he said that he didn't see a reason to break them up. He did not see a reason to break that group up. There wasn't a reason to separate Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen in the front court. And there was not a reason to separate Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland in the backcourt. And I personally did not believe what Kobe had to say. And it's not Kobe's job to stand up there and be truthful to the media. It's not the job of any executive in sports. I mean, you see it all the time. If you've been watching the offseason Hard Knocks that is focused on the New York Giants, you've seen, I'm sure, and even if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen that clip on social media of the Giants GM speaking with the PR person for the Giants saying, hey, how do we phrase this? You know, this isn't actually true, but how do I say it like this? That happens all the time in sports. So I thought when Kobe Altman said that, and I was wrong here, I thought when Kobe Altman said that this is one of the things that he has to say because if trades don't come together, you don't want to alienate one of the guys. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. And two, you don't want to just overtly tell the rest of the NBA world, hey, we're trading one of these guys, because that sort of diminishes their value on the trade market. So my thinking at that time was, well, they don't want to diminish the value and maybe they're not entirely sure what direction they want to go, but I thought that chances were far less than 50% that all four of those guys would play another game together in a Cavs uniform. And that could obviously still change, but as things look right now in late July, it does look like all four of them are going to be back. I didn't take Kobe at his word for that, but the fact that they really didn't even get into deep talks with the Spurs, and I know that the Spurs have since signed Chris Paul, the reporting is that this happened before that happened. They were interested in pairing Garland with Victor Wembanyama, which I think would be a great pairing, and I totally understand why the Spurs were interested in him. Makes sense to me. But I didn't believe that the Cavs truly wanted to run it back, and I think that them pushing back on the Spurs offer, not even really negotiating with San Antonio, according to this report, shows me that they were telling the truth. And it's not just that they were telling the truth because it's July 26th and all four guys are still on the roster, but I didn't know exactly what the market would be, especially for Darius Garland, because you look at what DeJounte Murray fetched the Atlanta Hawks in the trade market, it really wasn't a great return, I didn't think, at least. So maybe that offer just wasn't enough and it wasn't worth the Cavs' time. Or maybe Kobe Altman was telling the truth and they really do want to run it back with this same core four. I think we learned a little bit about that by this report. Maybe that's digging a little bit deep. I don't know. But I do think that is something we learned here. If the Cavs really had even an inkling of interest, and I have always felt that, and again, it looks like all four are going to be back. I have always felt that the more likely duo to return was both Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, because I do think that there's a way that they can work together on the floor. I think we've seen them work together on the floor, and I think that we will see them work together on the floor again in the future. And there's one other thing the Spurs having interest in Darius Garland says to me about the future of the Cavs, and I'm going to dive into that next on today's Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. You wouldn't be watching this video if you didn't love sports, if you didn't love the NBA, the WNBA, Major League Baseball, what have you, the Olympics. Olympic basketball is starting. Well, if you want to gamble on those sports, and I know you can't gamble on the NBA right now, but you can gamble on all the other stuff I mentioned, and FanDuel is the place to do it. All you have to do to keep the sports going whenever you want is open up the app and dream up any bets whenever you're in the mood to get a little bit of action in. This summer, FanDuel hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. Every day, a boost or a bonus. Every day, all summer long. There are win totals out both in the NFL and in the NBA. I think that's something that is absolutely worth looking into. I talked yesterday about the Cavs win total being set at 47.5. I think that number's low. I think they're going to win 50 plus games. Maybe you agree. FanDuel is the place to go if you do agree, because I think there's money to be made on that line. FanDuel has something, like I said, for everybody all summer long, a boost, a bonus, what have you. Every single day, they're hooking you up. So go to FanDuel.com and you can start to make the most out of your summer. Again, that's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So the last thing that I think the Spurs having interest for Darius Garland says about what could be in the future of Darius Garland this upcoming season is that the Cavs, and I guess this is maybe more of a me thing, but I do believe the Cavs think this. They're not alone in thinking Darius Garland is primed for a bounce back year. Like I mentioned earlier, think of all the things that went wrong with Darius Garland this year. There was the jaw. There was the wrist or thumb. There was, I believe he had a leg injury at some point. There was a death in his family that pulled him away from the team at times. That's a lot to deal with. When you miss as much time as he did, and I think the jaw is probably the one that impacted this the most. When you miss as much time as he did, when you lose as much weight as he lost, when you go as long as he went without being able to eat solid foods, think about how miserable that is. I would be absolutely mortified if I had to consume all of my calories through a straw for like 4 weeks. There are few things that I can think of that are that awful. That was Darius Garland's life. His numbers went down. The three-point shooting went down. His ability to attack the basket was really at an all-time low for him. He was not good in that standpoint. I talked about that with Tony Pesta on an earlier edition of Locked on Cavs this week. I expect a lot of that to bounce back. Maybe he's not an all-star again. I don't know if he will be. I think it's going to be really difficult for him to be an all-star again as long as Donovan Mitchell's on this roster. Not because Darius Garland's not good enough to be an all-star. I wholeheartedly believe that he is. Once upon a time, I was a guest on this very podcast, and I talked about how I thought Darius Garland had an all-NBA future. I still think that highly of him. I just think that the role for him has changed a little bit. But the Spurs having interest in him tells me that the Cavs aren't alone in thinking that a bounce back is on the way for Garland. That Garland is going to have a much better season this year and in the future. Because one line that Jake Fisher put in that Yahoo Sports report was that the Spurs were trying to pair Victor Wembanyama with a younger guard who is a veteran but hasn't reached his prime yet. I believe that describes Darius Garland perfectly. I think that is exactly who Darius Garland is. I don't think we've seen his best days. He's still young. There's still time to improve. I think that a lot of his game is going to look so much better this upcoming season than it did last year. I think it's going to look much, much, much better than it did. That's something that I'm very excited to watch for. And that to me is actually going to be one of the keys for this Cavs season is how good does Darius Garland look? The Cavs obviously believe it. I think the San Antonio Spurs believe it. I think a lot of the NBA believes it, but I also think a lot of the NBA probably hesitant to pay what he would be worth in the trade market. But the Spurs trying to trade for him while his value is low, thought that was a really smart move on San Antonio's part. I think it's a smarter move by the Cavs to not engage in further negotiations and to keep that backcourt together, because I really do think that it could work out. One of the other things I wanted to touch on in today's show, because I haven't gotten to this, and this was a little bit of news that came out last week, but the groupings for the NBA Cup, formerly known as the in-season tournament, the artist formerly known as the in-season tournament in the NBA, were announced late last week. I was in Vegas during this. I didn't have time to get to it during one of those shows while we were talking about a ton of Summer League stuff, a ton of Jalen Tyson stuff. Just this was something that I had to put on my back burner, but I do want to talk about today because I talked a little bit yesterday about the line on FanDuel for the Cavs to win the NBA Cup. I believe it's at plus 2,500 or maybe plus 2,000 for them to hoist that trophy and I guess raise a banner like the Lakers did. And their group was announced. I think that this is a really good opportunity for the Cavs. They're very clearly the second best team in their group, but that doesn't mean they can't advance out of it. That doesn't mean that. One thing they have going for their favor, there's a wild card spot to advance to the knockout round in the NBA Cup. You don't have to win your group to advance. It helps, obviously, that is an automatic advancement, but you can finish second, and if you play well enough and finish second, you still can advance. And the Cavs could find themselves in that spot. So their group, obviously themselves, the Cleveland Cavaliers were the number 2 seed in this group. The Boston Celtics share a group with the Cavs. Obviously, that's a tough draw. Celtics, I think, going into the season as the best team in the NBA. But what I think changes things a little bit for Boston here. One, they're coming off of the shortest offseason you can possibly have. They played into June. They've got a shorter offseason. That matters. Two, the timing of this 100% matters, where this being in the first part of the season as opposed to the second part of the season. I wouldn't expect Boston to look like the team that just won the finals in November and December when this NBA Cup is going on. So you have to keep that in mind as well. The Celtics have 3 guys on Team USA. They've got Drew Holiday, they've got Jason Tatum, they've got Derek White. So I talked just a minute ago about how Boston itself has a very short offseason. That offseason is all but eliminated for those 3 guys. Team USA starts up this weekend. They'll be playing until the middle of August. And then a month and a half after that, training camp begins. So in reality, the offseason for 3 of the 5 most important players for the Boston Celtics is about 6 weeks. That's not very long. I think that goes in the Cavs' favor. And lastly, the other thing that I think is very important when you talk about Boston is maybe not being a championship contender in this in-season tournament specifically. Kristaps Porzingis, we know he had to have surgery on that calf muscle after the finals were over. It's been reported he might not play until December or even possibly January. So for the in-season cup, or the NBA Cup, the in-season tournament, whatever we're going to call it, he might not be available at all. So when you join all those things together, I think that is something that creates an advantage for the Cavs. Maybe they're not the favorite in this group, but I think their chances of getting out of it are much better with Boston in it than you would think because of how good Boston is. Now, these are all regular season games. There's no telling how this could go, but I think that's worth thinking about. Next up in the group, they've got the Atlanta Hawks. I don't think Atlanta's going to be all that good. They'll probably end up finishing 8th or 9th in the Eastern Conference in the somebody's got to be at the bottom of the play-in picture in the East. That's kind of where I see Atlanta. I'm just not buying them this year. Trae Young's good, don't get me wrong, but I think that the Cavs are very clearly a better team, and I don't love what they got back for DeJounte Murray. Obviously, I do like Larry Nance Jr. as a player, but I just don't think that they got enough back for him. I think that Atlanta might be a team that takes a step back this year, although maybe with more of a simplified backcourt and more of Trae Young running the show and less of having to worry about DeJounte Murray, that could be a good thing for the Hawks. I don't know. I'm going to venture to guess that the Cavs are still going to be better than them. And then the final 2 teams, and I think the Cavs really lucked out here. They've got the Chicago Bulls, who finally want to lose basketball games. It took forever for the Bulls to accept the reality that that team was never going to be better than a 6 seed. They won, I believe, a single playoff game in that Bulls era. They've sold off pieces. They're trying to finally tank. I would expect that the roster they have now looks much different at the end of this year, but that doesn't matter for the NBA Cup. But they're in this group too. the Cavs should be able to handle the Bulls pretty easily. I think it really, until that game right before the All-Star game, they had won like 9 straight games against Chicago. I would expect that trend to continue. And then lastly, the Washington Wizards, who are just a dumpster fire. They're not the worst team in basketball because Detroit exists, because Brooklyn is going to try and lose a lot of games this year as well. But the Wizards are not serious. They're not going to be a serious contender for this. And I actually think this group, despite having the NBA champions in it, I think this group is pretty weak. And I think that is something that Cavs fans should be able to look forward to. This team should be one that you can maybe expect to be in the knockout round of the NBA Cup. And I think that despite the NBA Cup being a newer thing and not really knowing what to think of it overall, I think it'd be a cool thing to see the Cavs advance to the knockout round. Hey, maybe they'll end up in Las Vegas for the semifinals and championship. I think that'd be a really, really cool thing. There was some big NBA news that will affect how you watch the Cavs moving forward. I want to talk about the new TV rights deal next on today's Locked On Cavs. Today's show also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime, of course, is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. If you want to go to a baseball game, Gametime is the place to go. Check out the tickets that you want to buy. Guardians played yesterday afternoon against the Tigers. I thought about going to that game, but ultimately, I was a little too busy with some work stuff. I just didn't have the time. But if I would have gone, you know where I would have gone to find tickets, and that would have been Gametime. They are the best ticket marketplace out there. They've got killer last-minute deals. As prices actually go down closer to first pitch. If I would have checked yesterday at about 12:45, I probably would have got an outstanding deal, because that's the way Gametime works. They also show you the all-in price. So when you're curious, how much is this really going to cost me? Is it the $50 it says on the app, or are they going to bombard me with taxes and fees at the last minute? No, Gametime doesn't do that. What you see is what you pay. They take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I've told you, I use Gametime. I almost used it in Vegas. I was a little too tired to go to that Aces game. Thought about using it yesterday. Moving forward, Gametime is the place that I go. It's just, I've had such a good experience using that app. When I need tickets, Gametime, that's the app I pull up on my phone. It's the app you should pull up too. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. And you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, download the Gametime app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So it was announced by the NBA Wednesday, I should say. It was announced on Wednesday, the new TV rights deal with the league, to where the NBA on TNT going to go away after this year. Of course, pending some litigation. We don't know exactly what's going to happen there, but if the NBA is confident enough to announce what's happening here, I'm willing to bet that the NBA on TNT going to go away. It's going to be replaced by Amazon, going to have games, so you will be able to stream Cavs games, it sounds like, in the future, and the NBA on NBC, which is making a return after 20 plus years of not having coverage. Of course, ESPN, ABC, the Disney rights package is still going to be in place, where they will have the NBA Finals and Conference Finals and some nationally televised games throughout the week during the regular season too. But I think this is a really cool thing. The first thing I have to mention here, because I am as excited about this as anybody else, is the return of Round Ball Rock. It is one of the best theme songs in any sports history. I can't wait to tune into the first NBA on NBC game and check it out. I'm very, very excited. Like, I'm going to have goosebumps at that moment. I think a lot of you out there will too. I remember as a kid watching the NBA on NBC and hearing that song. It's a very distinct memory of mine, and I think a lot of people share that memory. So I think that's going to be a really cool thing. And I know, I get it, that song's been around for some college basketball stuff over the last few years. It just doesn't feel right on college basketball. It doesn't. It's something that it belongs with the NBA, and I'm glad that it's going to be back with the NBA. I'm very excited to see what NBA does, or what NBC does with their NBA coverage. I think that they do a really good job with the NFL. I think that they do a really good job with Notre Dame football. I think the jury is still out on their college football coverage as a whole, considering last year was their first year with it. I hope it looks much more like that than their golf coverage. I'm a big golf guy for those of you that don't know. I love golf. I love to watch golf. I'm not a big fan of the way NBC covers golf. So I very much hope the NBA, and I expect this to be the case because of how much money they're investing. I very much hope that the NBA on NBC looks more like the NFL does than anything else. I think it'll be awesome. And then the Amazon aspect of this, I do find interesting that you'll be able to stream games the same way you could stream Thursday night football in the NFL on Amazon this past year. That's going to be coming to basketball. They will have nationally televised games. And one of the cool things that I think about this is that they're going to be national TV games essentially every night once we get into the thick of the season. And that, I think, is a really cool thing for NBA fans. League Pass is a pretty accessible product that if you want to watch a team in a different market, it's a pretty easy thing to do. But having this is going to make it, I think, much easier for fans to consume the product nationally. And I do think that the game's going to grow. And I think that this is overall a really good thing for the sport. I think it's a really good thing. I can't wait to see how this plays out in a couple years. Yes, I will miss Inside the NBA like everybody else, but I am excited to see, one, if that show ends up going to Amazon, and two, what coverage looks like for NBC and what it looks like for Amazon. I think that those are some pretty exciting things in the future of the NBA and of the Cavs. You know, you have to think about the Cavs when you think about this because they're going to be a good team. They're not going away. They're going to have nationally televised games on those new networks. They're going to have nationally televised games on NBC, on Amazon. I think it's going to be a really cool thing, and I can't wait to see what it looks like. But thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. If you're listening to this via podcast, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you've submitted that 5-star review as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you click that like button. If you're this far into the video and you haven't clicked the like button, I need you to click that thumbs up for me. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Cavs YouTube channel as well. And click that notification bell. Make sure you know when the latest content from Locked On Cavs is going up on YouTube. We've got a ton to get into next week as the offseason rolls on with the Cleveland Cavaliers and the NBA. Make sure you keep making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day.